Hey everyone, welcome back to the Mostly Professional podcast. I am your host, Matthew James French. Today we've got a solo episode, a little bit shorter, about failure. So as you can gather from the title, I failed the Everest Trail and here's what I learned. I thought it was cute because it rhymed. But I really wanted to talk about failure and setbacks today. So I'm going to start with a little bit of an overview. I think that there's a spectrum of scale in terms of failure and setbacks, but I think something that doesn't get talked about is maybe the categories of failure maybe being objective and subjective. So maybe an objective failure, and I'm going to use the word failure throughout, even though it might seem a little extreme sometimes, just as a way to mean that something didn't succeed. So let's say you're at the gym and you try and pick up a heavy weight and you can't do it. So that's a small failure, small setback, whatever. And then maybe on the flip side of that, it was a really, really important job you applied for, you got all the way towards the end, but they didn't pick you. Maybe that to you is a big failure. A lot of the time, failures, especially because that word has a lot of connotation, is subjective and comes with an emotional response. So it's usually the emotional response that makes everything seem bigger and worse than it actually is. So often what happens is because we're having an emotional response and something didn't go our way, we can blame, we can get upset, angry, sad, frustrated, whatever. Usually where this is happening is because of a word that plays a large part in the talk about failure, which is the word should. This should have happened. This shouldn't have happened. They shouldn't have said that. All these things come together, and it all comes down to a perception of reality, that you have a perception of how things should or shouldn't be, and when those don't clash with how things actually turn out, an emotional response will happen. So for me, what happened on the Everest Trail was that, for those of you who don't know, you don't just arrive at Mount Everest. You fly to Nepal, Kathmandu Airport. If you're lucky, you can fly straight to a little place called Lukla, or you have to drive for 5 hours and then fly to Lukla in this dinky little plane, heavily affected by wind, and then you land on a tiny airstrip on the side of a mountain, and then you walk for 2 to 3 weeks up to Mount Everest base camp and then back down. Unless you want to climb Mount Everest, in which case, all the best. So what happened to my mum and I, because that's who I went with, is we went to Lukla, we met our guide, Saran Limbu, who I'm linking below because he's amazing and a very beautiful human being. We walked for a few days, over the course of a few days, to Namche Bazaar, which is kind of like the big town on the way. And when we were there, we were doing some exploring around town, again, on the side of a mountain, very steep. And I remember at the end of one of those, I think the second day, my left hip flexor was getting really aggravated and sore, and it hurt to lift my leg. And if you're doing a multi-week hike and your leg hurts, it's very concerning. So what happened eventually is that I had to decide that that was it. Namche Bazaar was as far as we were going to get, and I was really upset. I felt like I was letting down my mum and the guide and myself. This shouldn't have happened. I should have done things differently. My perception of reality was that I was going to get to the end, and I didn't, and that was upsetting. I remember sitting down and crying because it felt like a massive failure to come all the way to Nepal, to come and walk all the way up to Mount Everest, and there was all this build up, and I didn't do it. I couldn't do it. And on the walk back to Lukla, which took a few days, over time I got more and more okay with it and able to accept what actually happened. Another thing happened in, I think, December of 2018. I was overhead pressing at the gym and I hurt my back, and for several weeks I had to see a chiropractor 3-4 times a week. I was in extreme pain and discomfort and lack of mobility and having shooting pain in my neck and all these things, and that was a result of my negligence and irresponsibility for not doing enough mobility work, maybe trying to lift too much weight, all of these things that resulted in something that I thought shouldn't have happened. And it sucked, having to change my workout routine or not being able to train and having to completely sever the amount of weight that I would lift, if at all, because of that. But at the same time, it was probably really useful for me. Not useful, but sometimes it takes a catastrophe to reassess what you're doing. And I think that can be a silver lining to some failures and setbacks. There are other examples of failures I've experienced on the smaller scale more frequently, like, you ask out a girl and she says no in whichever way, and that's fine. Or maybe writing a song or a piece of work and it's not good. Not everything you make is going to be good. And that might be by your own standards or it might be by others. As an actor, I have had as actors do, had the experience of every audition you're probably not going to get. So every audition is almost definitely going to be a rejection, a failure. And the good thing about sticking with it over time is that you can get kind of immune to that. It's just like, yeah, whatever. Sometimes it doesn't carry over, maybe for some people, but for me, I wish that I had that same kind of attitude with acting that I did with my hip, instead of turning it into a drama as an actor, funnily enough. So I have some takeaways, some thoughts on failures and setbacks, of questions to ask yourself, and these were things that I asked myself in moments of better clarity. And some of these things have been really helpful to reassess what's going on and stop making everything as horrible as it could be. So, is this even a failure? Am I being overdramatic? Am I being objective, subjective? What's actually happening? Especially in things that you can reattempt. You didn't pick up that weight this time, and try it again next time. Made a recipe and it wasn't very tasty, you can make it next time. Or if it's a bigger issue, more important to you, understanding that you're not the only one this has happened to. There's unity in that of you're not alone. Everyone who is more successful than you has probably failed more than you as well from the things that they've tried. Having a perspective shift, I think, is important. That can happen within yourself through time and distance, of thinking back on things with a more clear, again, sort of objective lens of, oh, that's what happened. It wasn't a big deal. And it's hard to do that in the moment, but you can get better at that with practice. Another perspective shift is, how would you treat someone else? Because a lot of people have very negative self-talk. How would you treat someone else if that's what happened to them? If you had a best friend who went for their dream job and they didn't get it, and they came to you and told you, how would you talk to them? Because it's probably very different than how you would talk to yourself. So having some self-compassion in that regard. However, making sure that you also take responsibility where necessary, where relevant. Because I think the combination of taking responsibility and giving yourself some self-compassion is the best of both worlds, of tough love that goes together to make you stronger and go forward. The other part of that would be on the more responsibility end. What is this teaching me? What can I learn from it? From some of the things that happened to me, I learned a lot about my body and my limitations and what I need to work on. With some of the work I've made, I've seen some of my patterns and habits that I need to break. With things that are out of my control, sometimes just learning that that's out of your control and that you can drive yourself crazy trying to fix everything. What can I do to prevent this or improve it? Pick yourself up and dust yourself off so you can do it again next time. That's important. That's, again, taking responsibility so that you can move forward and break through it. Those are my thoughts on failure and setbacks. So I failed the Everest Trail, and here's what I learned. Take it slow and steady. Give yourself time. Work on the less fun fundamentals. In this case, it was mobility and stretching and patience. Things go wrong. The people around you, one, can affect how you handle that situation, but you're also responsible for what they have to deal with. When someone else has something go wrong and they have a big tantrum and are childish, how do you feel at that time? So keep that in mind too, is that your actions have consequences. So in summary, I think there's a spectrum of small to big scale failures and setbacks. I think they can often be categorized as objective and subjective, and it's really hard to tell the difference sometimes in the moment. I think there are some takeaways, there are some questions we can ask ourselves to be productive with what's happened. Is it an objective or a subjective failure? Give yourself a perspective shift. If it was someone else, how would you talk to them about it? What can you learn from this? What is it teaching you? What can you do to prevent this or improve upon it next time? And have the ultimate blend of self-responsibility and self-compassion. And I think that will move you forward. Thank you again for listening to the Mostly Professional podcast. My name is Matthew James French. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment below your thoughts. I'm really curious to see what setbacks and failures you've experienced and how you moved forward with them. Share the video around if that tickles your fancy. And my socials are in the description below. You can find me on my website at matthewjamesfrench.com. I'm on Instagram at matthewjamesfrench. This channel, pretty decent productions on Instagram. My music is on SoundCloud at Maciek Mijanowski, which is in the link below because the spelling is weird. That's my Polish name, and I thought it was fun. So I will see you in the next one, and have a pleasant day, and see you soon.